In this video, we're going to see how we can create a scope manually. Let's go to our Blazor web app project and open the program.cs class file and copy the call to add DB context. Now go to our console application project and open the program class and paste the code right here and change builder.services to just services and bring in the namespace Microsoft.entityFramework core. Set the console application project as a startup project. Here we are calling services.buildServiceProvider. This is going to create what is known as the root service provider or the root dependency injection container. Now let's use the getRequiredService method on the iService provider to get a required service of type bookService. So say var bookService1 equals provider.getRequiredService of bookService, and then let's say console.writeLine bookservice1.getHashCode. Similarly, let's resolve another instance of bookservice and also print its hash code to the console. Finally, let's go to debug and click delete all breakpoints because we added a breakpoint earlier. And then let's run our application. We see we get the same hash code. This is because we are getting the same instance of bookservice. So what's happening? First, we registered our bookservice class as a scoped service. Then we called services.buildServiceProvider that created a root dependency injection container. But after that, we are calling getRequiredService method directly on our iService provider without creating any scope. In the section Lifetime Management and Interception, we saw that in ASP.NET Core, a scope maps to a request. So in a given HTTP request, a scope is automatically created and we can resolve scoped services in the desired manner. But what about console applications? Maybe we want to process items one by one from a queue. In this case, a scope is not automatically created. So if we try to resolve a scoped service from the root dependency injection container without creating a scope, the service behaves like a singleton. So we have to create a scope manually. In other words, we have to create a custom scope. So how to do that? First, let's comment out these lines of code. We need to create what is known as an iService scope implementation. We can do that by calling the createScope method on our provider instance. Since iService scope implements iDisposable, we need to wrap it in a using statement. So say using var scope equals provider.createScope, and within that scope, we have access to the underlying dependency injection container via the service provider property. So say var bookservice1 equals scope.serviceprovider.getRequiredService of bookservice. And let's print the hash code of the bookservice instance to the console. Now copy these lines and paste them down here and change this one to bookservice2 and do the same thing here. Now let's create a second scope by copying this entire using statement and pasting it down below. And if we run the application, we see we get one unique instance for each scope. So what's going on? First, we registered our bookservice class as a scoped service. Then we called buildServiceProvider that creates our root dependency injection container. Then we created a scope inside of it, and from within that scope, we called serviceprovider.getRequiredService of bookservice. This will resolve a new instance of bookservice, and within that same scope, when we called getRequiredService the second time, the previous instance of bookservice was used. When we created a second scope and we called getRequiredService on the service provider, it resolved a new instance of bookservice, and that same instance was used the next time we called getRequiredService within that same scope. Finally, a quick word about the difference between getRequiredService and getService. GetRequiredService and getService are two extension methods on the iService provider interface. The getRequiredService method returns a service of type service type from the dependency injection container. If there is no registered service of type service type, then it throws an invalid operation exception. The getService method, on the other hand, also returns a service of type service type from the dependency injection container. But if there is no registered service, then it does not throw an exception. It simply returns null. In the next video, we will take a look at scope validation.